Okay, this is part one of our fourth unit, the Age of Exploration. And basically, we're going to start with the expanding economies of the European states that stimulated increased trade with markets in Asia, which basically means there was a lot of trading happening, a lot of goods in demand, a lot of resources. With the loss of Constantinople in 1453, which we'll talk about later, European nations fronting the Atlantic sought new maritime routes for trade. So with Constantinople blocked, they had to find other ways to get to Asia. Part 1. Now this is before Columbus set sail. This is what they thought the world kind of looked like. Some parts are pretty accurate, others not so much. Alright, motives for exploration. You had the Crusades, which was a bypass for intermediaries to get to Asia. Okay, so after the Crusades end, Constantinople, which is kind of a gateway, remember that gateway city between Asia and Europe, is gone, so now they got to find other ways to get there. The Renaissance, curiosity about other lands and people. The Reformation, you had religious refugees and missionaries going to other places, such as the Americas, Asia, and Africa, to spread their religion. Monarchs were seeking new sources of revenue to make themselves richer. You had new technological advances, and then you always had the issue of fame and fortune. Why did Europeans explore? The 3 G's: gold, glory, and God. Gold, obviously, was very valuable, and especially in Europe, and they used it to trade for spices, as well as other natural resources. Glory, you wanted your country to be the first to claim lands for the king and queen of that country, because more lands meant more power, as we'll see with mercantilism coming up. And then, of course, the spread of Christianity, which kind of was a byproduct of the Reformation, and they like to use a fancy word here, diffusion, which was kind of a fancier way of saying spread. Portugal and Spain at the time were the two heavy hitters, if you will, of the exploration scene. Portugal was the first to put ports on the African coast. They were first to establish a direct sea route to Asia. Meanwhile, Spain, Columbus reached a Caribbean island. Portugal, when that happened, was envious and worried. So a rivalry between these two started, and obviously the other part of that rivalry probably stems from the fact that they share the Iberian Peninsula right here. Let's see, here's Portugal here, a port city. The Treaty of Tordesillas was a line that was set by the Pope at the time, and basically it divided the world into 2 parts. One part, this part over here, the Western Hemisphere, was mainly open to Spanish territorial claims, and this over here was for the Portuguese, although that did not necessarily always stick, as it would later on. And Portugal and Spain's actions sparked the rest of Europe, to want to explore. European discovery in the Western Hemisphere. Remember, Europe is in the Eastern Hemisphere. The Americas are in the West. Demand for gold, spices, and natural resources in Europe. Support for the diffusion of Christianity, means of different ways they diffuse Christianity. Migration of colonists to new lands. You had the influence of Catholic and Protestant colonists who carried their faith, language, and cultures to new lands. Remember, the Puritans who came to America, or the New World from England, were Protestants seeking a better way to practice their religion, or more freedom to practice that religion. And obviously the conversion of indigenous people. Indigenous means natives. Okay, so in this case we're talking about, they could be African natives, they could be Latin American natives, Native Americans, or the American Indian. And again, political and economic competition. Okay, in these countries, really started competing a great deal economically at this time. Again, the more places you claim, the more resources you might have, which could mean more money, more gold for that country. Then you had innovations of European and Islamic origins in navigational arts, which meant improved maps, the astrolabe, caravel ships. Caravel ships used, let's see here, lateen sails, which allowed them to travel faster and make them more maneuverable. One guy that was important to this improved interest, or this greater interest in navigation, was Prince Henry the Navigator. He was from Portugal, and his family had a lot of money. They explored along the African coast, setting up some trade ports, and he got rich off that, and he paid for a lot of ships to be built. Which takes us to, here's a caravel ship. So these ships were made they're kind of like tractor trailers. They could carry a lot of stuff across the oceans, across the seas, to and from their destinations. So our explorers, we're going to talk a little bit more about this guy coming up. Christopher Columbus was from Italy, but he sailed for Spain. Obviously, he crossed the Atlantic looking for Asia, quote unquote, discovered the New World. Some people obviously think that he was not the first European, but the Vikings were. And he made 4 trips to the New World. Here's the first one here is in orange. Then he made another one the following year. Then this one, and then here, more along the Central American, or Eastern Central American coastline there. 1497, you have Vasco da Gama from Portugal, and he sailed around the tip of Africa to India. Nobody had done that before, and he was bringing Christians with him in search of spices. Francisco Pizarro, he was a conquistador, and he was the guy that brought about the end of the Incan Empire, which we learned about it at the end of last year in World History 1. And he claimed Peru and Chile for Spain. And here's South America. Peru and Chile over here on this western coast here. Hernando Cortez, another Spanish conquistador. He conquered the Aztecs, and he also, which would later, the Aztec Empire, was in the heart of Mexico. So basically, Cortez was able to claim Mexico for Spain. And we'll talk more about his conquering of the Aztecs and how he did that later, because that was not easy. Well, the Aztecs were tough. So here he is here. You can see this is New Spain here. Old Spain is the original Spain. So he came over here through Cuba, the Caribbean, Yucatan Peninsula, and up and down the part of Central America. Ferdinand Magellan. He was the first guy to circumnavigate the globe. Let's put an asterisk by that. He actually died in the Philippines before finishing his voyage, but his crew were the ones that finished the trip. But for some strange reason, they give him credit for doing it, but he didn't. So there's his path. He leaves here with 237 sailors, and by the time he gets back, 18 sailors complete the trip. So he starts with 237, and he's down to, 18 are left by the time they get back. And he's killed in the Philippines in 1521, April of 1521. Jacques Cartier from France, he claimed Canada for France, most notably Quebec, and Quebec still has a French-speaking, speaks mostly French today, as well as founding the St. Lawrence River. And here's his little journey across the Atlantic to Canada. Remember, Cartier claims Canada. Cartier claims Canada for France. CCCF. And then finally, Sir Francis Drake from Englishman. He was an Englishman. He was the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe. And he obviously did this while Queen Elizabeth I was the queen, which kind of made her, more powerful and brought more prestige to her reign as Queen of England. And there's the same trip he took, pretty much the same as Magellan, more or less. Maybe a few different stops. Alright, so remember, gold, glory, God, lots of guys, lots of countries were involved, and this really obviously opened up the world, opening it up and also at the same time bringing it closer together, if that makes sense. And you'll have to fill out your map with the exploration routes, which we'll get to shortly. Alright, so if you got any questions, stuff you don't understand, stuff you want to ask in class, please write that stuff down, and so we can talk about it. Get your summary done. Remember, that's 25 points of your grade. And then some key points, mainly why was Europe motivated to hit the seas and find all of these places? What was driving them to get out there and explore? So finish those up, and I will see you next class.